Welcome and good morning.
Good morning.
I'm Frank Jones, and I'm the chairperson of the Ethnic Awareness Committee here at Horizon House. What you're going to experience today is one of the initiatives that the committee manages. Obviously, we did a decent job with the alert, because that's why you're here. I believe you saw our notice in the alert and maybe in the elevator. What that tells me, you are curious. You have intelligence, and you have courage. Now, why do I say that? In early 2020, the world faced a new health threat. It came with new vocabulary. And along with that, a highly visible murder of George Floyd that disrupted life around the globe as people poured into the streets. It placed race, policing, and how America treats non-whites. A reckoning was taking place. As the chair of the Ethnic Awareness Committee, I received an email during this period from Peter Shapiro. He's the Horizon House Resident Council President. And the issue had to do with recognizing stereotypes that he had. And he didn't let it rest. He knew about the committee, and based on that email, I invited Peter to attend one of our committee meetings where he shared the same information. I'm going to ask Peter to join me at the podium.
Is that future or present?
My memory is that Peter came and he repeated the points he made in the email to me. And I wanted him to describe what the stereotype was that he recognized that he had.
Well, I'm going to read that email, if with your permission, in a little while. It had to do with watching the turmoil that surrounded COVID. We were all glued to our televisions, trying to figure out what's going on, what will happen to the world, what will happen to the country, to our society, to ourselves. And we saw this parade of professional people coming before us. And they didn't look like what we were used to seeing, and it was a wonderful sight. I'm going to start, with Frank's permission, with a brief excerpt, I hope it's brief enough, from a memoir that I started about that time. Yes?
Yes. And just to carry it a little bit further, I remember that he emphasized the fact that on the news were these experts about coronavirus. Peter said he expected to see people who look like him from Northern Europe as the experts. But the experts he was seeing came from different parts of the world, from Africa, from Asia, and these were the top infectious disease specialists in the world. You know one right here in Horizon House, Dr. George Count. So we're living with images that represent superiority, high knowledge, against the reality that there are lots of people who have important resources to serve humanity. So, did you want to go to read what you wanted? I'm going to turn this over, then I come back.
Thank you, Frank. It's one of those times when you drop a pebble in the pond. And you see the circles going out from that. I'm delighted that you're here with us. My story from chapters from Two Lives starts when I was a first grader, so 75 years ago. But I think that it illustrates how we get to where we are in terms of stereotypes. Brooklyn, 1939. Brooklyn, in case you didn't know, is the largest borough in the largest city of the largest state of the United States of America. At least it was on March 15, 1939. I didn't know that fact when I was born that day, but so I learned growing up. My neighborhood was Jewish. Wasn't everyone everywhere? So it was only logical and natural that I was a Jewish boy in a Jewish neighborhood in the largest borough of the largest city of the largest state of the United States of America, the center of the world. That's how things would appear to a very lucky kid growing up in a loving family, in a safe neighborhood, inhabited by nice people, all of whom looked like me. Except for one who I loved, but hurt. Of course, I learned later that most little boys had not been so fortunate. Mom and Dad were both school teachers. Their choice of profession got them through the Great Depression with a deep appreciation of the difference between having work and income and not having work and income. Having a secure, safe place to live or not. After my older brother was born, they hired domestic help so Mom could go back to teaching. Bertha came into our lives. Bertha's home was across Eastern Parkway from Crown Heights in a colored neighborhood. For many years, when we were young, she lived with us nearly full time. She was a daughter of the South. She was a granddaughter of slaves. Bertha was another mother for us boys. One day, in the schoolyard, in that first year at school, one of my classmates said something to me that he thought was pretty clever. I guess I thought it was pretty clever, so I repeated it to Bertha when I got home. Your skin is dirty. I wasn't intending to hurt or even know that I was. Just a first grader repeating something that seemed clever, but wasn't, because he didn't know enough yet to tell the difference. Our family had a conversation. Bertha's grandson Edgar was the same age as my older brother. They sometimes played together. When I was old enough for school, Bertha came to help us only daytime. Edgar would come by in the evenings when days were short to walk his grandmother home in the dark. There was a knock on the side kitchen door. One such evening I ran to answer. There was Edgar in the alley, a few steps below. There was a policeman standing over him. The policeman was big. He was white. It was raining. The cop wore a rubber raincoat and hat. They glistened with droplets. He had a close hold of Edgar. Edgar was looking at me with frightened, beseeching, hopeful eyes. They implored, "You know me. You recognize me. You know I told the truth." It drove home to me the lesson I had first learned after blurting out to Bertha those unthinking words. "Your skin is dirty." My deepest regrets about Bertha have been two. What I said that day coming home from the schoolyard, and that she died a few weeks before I brought my future wife home for the first time to meet the family. They would have loved each other. Now, as I write and recall that Bertha was the granddaughter of slaves, another deep regret is that I never thought to learn from Bertha what her family knew of that horror. Maybe she wouldn't have said. And this is what I wrote to Frank, which I guess in part brings us here. It was after that April, COVID raging, George Floyd dead at the knee of white policemen. Dear Frank, I have been struck, inspired, and at times hopeful about one particular possible outcome of the crisis that we are in. Every day and every hour, the reports in media about our crisis and the country's response are revealing a reality to those who watch and think. The image of a mature white man in a lab coat, wise, articulate, trusted, is no longer an image that fits reality in all its splendor. The factual and visual reporting gives me a degree of hope that our society will come out of this with a revelation that expertise and competence does not reside exclusively in the older white man professional image. We have constantly been seeing and learning during this crisis from medical professionals who are providing brilliant leadership, people who are young, people who are immigrants, people of color, people who are not defined by their gender or their exterior appearance, or because they speak with voices unfamiliar to our ears. People who are defined for all to see, all who are willing to see, by their intellectual competence, by their strength, by their dedication. The reality of today's images are vastly different from the stereotypical images that were so often drilled into our worldview since childhood, both as persons of privilege and, worse, as those young persons who were duped into believing that folks of color are less capable and less worthy than they are. So this new vision gives me hope. These are just some thoughts from one old white dude who continues to try to learn, to one old black dude and friend who continues to strive to help us learn. Thank you for that, Frank.
Thank you, Peter, for sharing. So, after Peter came to the March Ethnic Awareness Committee meeting, we began a process in our committee what do we do with this? The things that Peter talked about and we are all aware of started long before we came. What do you do on this campus? And so through thought and deliberation, we said, why not provide a safe opportunity for people to meet in small groups and engage the subject personally and community-wide. And out of that came a process that has continued weekly. I'll take responsibility for selecting some people who I thought would play a strong role and an effective role as discussion facilitators. Now, I think I did a good job, but I would not go to Vegas with it. And I will be introducing you to those people as the morning proceeds. Our agenda includes, at this point in time, you're viewing a video of Robin DiAngelo. She is on one of the late night shows, and I think we're ready to
Okay, turn your ears up. The speed will be tremendously different.
Busy you are, and everyone wants to talk to you right now, so this means a lot to me. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
And thank you so much for having me.
Your book, White Fragility, Why It's So Hard for White People to Talk About Racism, this came out in 2018,
Yes,
and it's been on the bestseller list ever since then.
it has, yes.
And right now, it is #1 on all the lists I looked at, and it's also, from what I read, it's sold out everywhere as well.
An unfortunate time for it to be sold out, but yes.
Yeah, well, here's what I did. I got it on Kindle.
Ah, okay.
I don't know if you saw this, it went viral online. A flight attendant was greeting people on her plane, and some gentleman came on and he was reading your book. It opened up a whole conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you brought that up because it actually illustrates several really important points about this. I mean, on the one hand, the story was special because a black woman and a white man had engaged conversation. He talked to her with humility and openness, and that was exceptional. But let's just notice that would be exceptional. You know, there's a question I often ask when I'm in front of a mixed race group. And I ask the black people in the room a kind of rhetorical question. How often have you attempted to give a white person feedback on their inevitable and often unaware racist assumptions or behaviors and have that go well for you? Never. Number 2, response, rarely. And I'll never forget asking a group, okay, so what if you could just give us feedback on our inevitable and often unaware racist assumptions and behaviors? And I'll never forget this black man raising his hand and saying, it would be revolutionary. And you know, just take that in. I just want all the white people to just take that in. Revolutionary, that we would receive the feedback with grace, reflect, and seek to change our behavior. That's how difficult we are. Wow. That's how big a-holes we are.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, you know, that's not a very tall order. Really? That's a revolution? But we can't get there from the current paradigm that says only mean people who want to hurt others based on race ever could do so. So So we just have to change what we understand it means to perpetrate racism.
Yeah, and, well, the term white fragility, did you coin that term? Did you come up with that, or is that it?
I did.
What does it mean for, exactly?
Well, the fragility part is meant to capture how little it takes to cause white people to melt down in defensiveness and umbrage. I mean, we make it so miserable for black people to talk to us about what they're experiencing from us, that most of the time they just don't. It's not worth it. It tends to get worse, not better. And so in that way, white fragility is quite powerful, and it protects the racial status quo.
Can you help me in a way? I want to ask a question. Like, how does one say, how does a white person say that they're not racist?
Well, white people often say, I'm not racist. I know you have, I have done things in my life I'm recognized as racist today. I would not do them again. They were neither intentional or even conscious, and yet they wounded other people nonetheless. I think white people should remove that phrase from their vocabulary. I'm not racist. It's not, trust me, it's not convincing to black people. As long as we define racism as individual, intentional acts of meanness, then I would agree with you that most white people are not racist. But when I'm talking about the racism that I have, the racism that you have, it's the result of living in a society in which racism is the foundation. We all absorb it. We all absorb it. There's no way we could exempt ourselves from it. And so we need to change our question from if I'm racist, to which most white people will say no, to how have I been shaped by the forces of racism I was born into, and how is it manifesting in my life? It's a really different question.
Yeah.
But if I asked if, and the answer is no, what further action is required of me to challenge racism? Nothing. I'm not racist. If I ask how have I been shaped and what is it looking like in my life, well, that sets me on a lifelong process. And I can just tell you, look around at the society, white people thinking we're not racist is not and has not ended racism. We have to change our paradigm. We can never be complacent.
So where can white people start?
I would say start with asking yourself this question: what does it mean to be white? Most white people can't answer that question. And if I can't hold what it means to be white, I cannot hold what it means not to be white. And I'm going to have no critical thinking on this topic, no skills to navigate this uncomfortable conversation, and no emotional capacity to withstand how uncomfortable the conversation is. And that means black people can't be their authentic selves with us. There are consequences to us not being able to answer that question. And if you start there, how has being white shaped my life? And how is that manifesting in my life? That will set you on a lifelong path.
Dr. D'Angelo, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me and being on the Tonight Show. I'd love to have you back, and I really appreciate us talking like this. Thank you so much.
I'd love to be back. Thank you.
The typical Horizon House audience, I now have lots of questions in your head. We will have a period a little later on in the morning, and hold on to those questions because they're very important as we proceed ahead. And another comment, as you know, a lot of committees here at Horizon House have invited speakers. I know the Ethnic Awareness hopes to have D'Angelo, and we may share sponsorship with maybe one or two of the other committees. 2018, she gave a lecture on this subject at the downtown library. And it's much longer, and it's a lecture, and I recommend it to you. And it's on YouTube. Okay. One of the rewards, if you will, about doing things at a rising house. As I look around the room, I see individuals who are active in all kinds of things here at Rising House. And I know you get lots of personal rewards with that. This effort that we are now calling Who Me has given me tremendous rewards. I've worked and planned and met with a fabulous group of humans. And I'd like to introduce them to you now. Sally Wren, and she'll be followed by Joan Singler, followed by Pat Fritz, followed by Jean Durney, and bringing up the rear, hardworking Adele. Okay, Sally?
Thank you, Frank, for always being there to support us and hold us to our highest. I was very active before I moved here in Call of Compassion Northwest, work of the Dalai Lama, Martin Luther King, and Gandhi. As a committee, as being on the board, I chose to work with millennials, and that was the first time in my life, so almost in my 80s, that I ever worked with a Black and biracial group. And I worked with these young people for the 3 or 4 years. Some had lived on the streets, been involved in drugs and alcohol, clean and sober for 10 years, and they had a program to go outreach with others their age to keep them in school and help them deal with their challenges. From that, I knew immediately when I came here, one of the committees I wanted to join was the ethnic group and go deeper because I had just scratched the surface. Then I had been reading books. I have several videos I've shown here. And I realized that I also had read in the books Layla Saad's book. When I read that, it rocked my world. It made me go deep. And I realized that I had grown up in a very white bubble. Even though I started on a farm for 13 years, where I learned in my teens my grandfather had enslaved people. And there are more questions than answers. But thank you for your attention.
Thanks, Sally.
Good morning. I asked myself, how is it that I end up here talking to you? I guess it's thank you, Frank. It's certainly not something I would have imagined doing just a few years ago. I would have said, I'm not an activist, other people can do that. Slowly over the past few years, between the news, books, programs, like the one here at Horizon House several years ago that was, I think it was basically sponsored by the UCC Church, I became more aware of how racism impacts everyone, including me. I've become aware that learning more history, more sociology, and so on, doesn't really do much. My learning about things is not going to change society and how we behave and act toward each other. The statement, if not you, then who? And if not now, when? Really resonated with me in a way it never had before. My hope is that I and you can be a small part of the changes needed to make our community, our city, our state, our country, our world a more equitable place. Should I talk about small groups? Should I talk about small groups?
I will do that.
Because I have a part. That's what I sent you. Okay, I will do it.
Could people introduce themselves? I don't know who's who.
We can't hear you.
I don't know who the speakers are.
Oh, repeat your name when you come to the mic.
I'm Pat Fritz.
Okay, thank you.
Good morning, I'm Joan Singler, and in answering the question, why join a who, me group, I'm going to share my experience in 2 minutes. I was 6 of 7 kids in a very poor family, raised with bias against not only blacks, but probably every other ethnic group in the world. Leaving that small, all-white community and then attending Wayne State University and marrying into a family that was active in the union and civil rights issues, I experienced a totally different world. A project that I engaged in at the University of Washington included a trip to Yakima, Washington, where I observed a small area of town that could only be called a black ghetto. This opened my world even more, and I made a commitment to try to bring about changes to end discrimination based on race. Wanting a very different beginning for our 2 daughters, Ed and I moved to the Central District and sent our kids to integrated school and became involved in the civil rights movement along with Jean Durning and Maid Adams. Today, my son-in-law is black, and I have 2 wonderful black grandchildren. So as a person of white privilege, I am interested in finding ways to change my involvement in the behavior of a culture that creates oppression, anger, and pain for Black, Indigenous, and people of color. Working through Layla Saad's, her book is mentioned, exercises with other Horizon House residents has made me aware of unspoken biases that I am acknowledging and working to change.
I'm Jean Durning. I'm going to be briefer, I hope. I started off thinking I'm one of the good guys, and I am embarrassed now to remember that I introduced myself to George when you first moved in with a list of my credentials. That's ridiculous. You know, so what that I had 1 term in a black university and things like that. But this book has been very, Layla Saad's exploration of series of questions to think of every day and to have to respond to has been useful, and we hope that it will be useful for you, again, in small groups, to explore yourself and look at the things that have been part of your life and that might change. Posted up around the wall are quotes from, just a few quotes from James Baldwin from more than half a century ago, and yet in so many ways they are still so relevant. In particular, I was struck by the one that's in several places, to be a Negro, which was the term of that period. To be a Negro in this country is to be in a rage most of the time, almost all the time. And that's something that I had read about by many, many people, and I had heard occasionally, until when we got to talking about that in our group, and Frank was generous enough to share with himself, oh dear, sorry, we're supposed to be confidential what we all said in those things, that it rang true with him, let's just put it that way. And this is our friend, this is somebody we think we know very well, and yes, of course, but I had to learn it again, be reminded. So I hope you will join one of these groups and go through this experience with us who have been through it once.
I have only 30 seconds. I'm Adele Reynolds, and it was a privilege and a pleasure to go through this book with a small group of people. We came together once a week and reviewed what we had thought about in the last week. And we tried to look at our own lives, our own thinking, and of course there's never enough time to share it all, but we shared with each other, and it was a privilege. I recommend it.
I dare say all of you in your lives have had the wonderful experience of working with other people on a project, on an effort, and everyone owns it. That's not just you providing the leadership or the energy. Working more than a year with these 5 individuals generated ownership. We have a member from the Ethnic Awareness Committee who was not one of the discussion leaders, but Mary Margaret Pruitt volunteered to do the, for bad term, scut work. You know, scheduling and meeting with staff and drawing up papers. And wouldn't you know it, she fell and had to be hospitalized briefly, and she's in recovery. And I think she's back here at Horizon House now. Otherwise she'd be here and we've been very active in our active this morning. And at one of our last meetings, I sent out an email about the meeting, and I said, what happened to us reminds me of what happens with and I gave the example of a college female soccer team when the star is injured and the team goes on. And that's this group. Each person feels ownership for this. They have invested in it being successful, that we are going to be, hopefully, a useful resource to those of you who made it this morning. Did we have to turn away many people outside who couldn't get in?
No.
Oh, okay.
But several had conflicts who came up and said, I can't.
Okay. Verbally, I can say that the group has scheduled a makeup session for Wednesday the 5th at 10 o'clock in this space. This is being recorded, so the people who come Wednesday can see the recording, and we will be here to do the Q&A and get them signed up for the small groups. Okay. So, several of the facilitators spoke about the Saad book. And I understand that Pat was the one that found the book. Most of us, myself included, never heard of it. Layla Saad identifies as a black female Muslim. She lives in Qatar, Qatar, a Middle East country. She's the product of parents who came from two different southern African countries. She was born, raised, and educated in the United Kingdom. I don't know if she's ever traveled to the United States or not. What's that?
She has.
Okay. But even though we used her product, it applies and is relevant to what we experience here in the United States. So she gets a lot of credit from me on that. Okay. One of the things that was very important in her book is on this poster to my right. And those are the rules that she recommended that you try to follow in trying to establish a safe environment for people to engage this subject. Most of us don't go willingly into let's say treatment at a mental health place without knowing that it's going to be confidential and that the people present are committed not just to their own issue, but mine as well. And I'm not going to read it all because the discussion facilitators will use that every time you meet. They will review that and see if you really understand what that is. Okay. The process that we've come up with is that after you have a chance to ask your questions, that you would consider signing up for one of the small groups. And who's going to do that?
Joan here.
Oh, okay.
Do you have a table?
Jean and Joan.
Jean and Joan.
Okay. Go ahead, Jean.
Well, at this table, you can line up behind which time you're interested in signing up for. If you've already filled out the half-sheet registration, you can leave that with us as long as it's got all your relevant information on it.
Okay, we'll repeat that after we have our dialogue on questions and answers. So who wants to start off with a question or an issue?
May I make? I can make a suggestion. Pat had been intending to make a brief explanation of what the sessions would be like, and maybe this would be the appropriate time for you to
That'd be good.
explain that.
is working.
That is the
I'm just
podium.
curious if this one's working,
This-
so it's not working. So we can't use the mic I had for question and answer time because it won't work if I give it to you to ask your question. The small, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. The small discussion groups are limited in size by our COVID restriction. So they'll be in the Myrtle Edwards room with 6 people, 1 facilitator and 5 others. We will use the book, Being White Supremacy, as a conversation guide. Her observations about our customary behavior and her questions for personal reflection offer insight without blame and with grace appropriate for change. Let me say that again. Yeah, and grace for appropriate change. We will do this by reading, journaling, and sharing over a period of 5 weeks. I have participated in this process twice. I've learned how sheltered I was growing up. I was never explicitly taught that others were less than me. It was never overt. It was always very subtle, and so it was is hard to recognize. I discovered and uncovered things that I had forgotten or never knew. In sharing, I learned that others had similar experiences. And I learned from others also that they had very different experiences. I look forward to a 3rd time with a small group of you who are willing to join the discussion. And Frank talked about this, and our guidelines over there talk about this, but a very important part is respect and care for each other and for confidentiality. There's a saying, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. What happens in the small group stays in the small group. For us to be open, we must trust each other. The Ethnic Awareness Committee has generously purchased a set of books for loan. You may borrow one of these books for the duration, and the sign-out table is over here. If you choose to buy your own book, I'm happy to take book orders and can get more books, purchase more books at LA Big Book Company at a discount. So it'll be $23 a book instead of $26. Thank you.
Thank you. Any, Cassandra?
Would you allow a comment?
Comes the mic.
I think the mics, I'll call the front desk and have them turn on the mics, but just step up if you would to the mic.
Sure.
Well, that one's working, Adele.
We could hear you this one.
You could hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe just one battery's dead.
Well, I just want to say that I recognize these agreements because they come from the Circle Way. And I think I've been yearning to have something that's under the Circle Way auspices for a long time here at Horizon House. I'm, as I say, very familiar with this process. Very familiar with this process, and I see great promise in our, as a group and our individual groups under this domain. Thank you.
And she
Back in
actually
the
does
corner.
have in the latter part of the book, in the appendix, I think, an explanation that's further up that Circle Way.
Thank you, Adele. Put this down. I don't think you can hear. I'm gonna go around. hear this?
Yeah,
Yes.
Okay, I wanted to be sure that I understand. The Myrtle Edwards Room will hold, for this purpose, five participants plus the group leader.
Yes.
And you're hoping for sign-up. So out of this 30 or so people, the max number of people that can sign up effectively is 5 people for this several-week process. Is that correct? And then perhaps later it will repeat. But this is
No,
not,
it's 25.
25.
It's 25.
so I thought that this was going to be something you wanted a commitment from each of us to attend. We ask that you make a commitment to attend a group every Monday from May 10 through June 7th.
that's it.
So if I sign up, I'm one of 5 people signing up, and nobody else, then those 5 people will be in there, and then it'll be,
No, there are 5 groups. I kept 5 times,
But they're not.
at different times, all on the same day. For 1 hour, there's a half hour between sessions, and so they continue all day.
thank you, I was too dense to understand that part.
So John, let's say you signed up for whatever time that was, let's say 9 o'clock. Each week for 5 weeks, you would come and participate. Okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I see another hand.
Everybody's bowled over?
I'm going to,
Really like that.
okay, I'm going to represent people who are hard of hearing, and I know in that room, we do, even though it's small, we do need to use the speakers.
Thank you. Good thing to mention.
Because of COVID-19 and space, we wanted the groups to stay small, and we really wanted them to be in person. It's very challenging to have this kind of subject discussed, and you're off in different physical locations. As you well know, we communicate an awful lot by body posture, who you're looking at, where your eyes are going. So, any other questions?
I have one additional comment. If you know exactly which hour you want to sign up for, fine. But if you get up here and that hour is filled, then we ask you to think about which other particular times would work for you. On the other hand, there are people who want to say, oh, I'd be fine anytime all morning or something. Make sure that we know that so that we can make assignments where necessary if you need to have a second opinion or something like that. Second option.
So, I think because of the time, we thought we'd be finished by 10:40. So if you're ready to let the people know which hour and day, you have the small forms with you, and just line up when you're ready at the table to my left.
The hours are set as 9, 10:30, and so on, down to the far end. Please try to line up for your particular time, but keep our COVID distance. Thank you.